We got a doozy of a video today. How do we prove adultery? If you are a spouse and you suspect that your significant other, your spouse, is committing adultery, how do you prove it? What kind of evidence is available in court? What are the standards? We're going to address each of these things today. I'm John Henderson with HH Law. Our family law division deals with issues of adultery quite frequently, and we have seen over the years lots and lots of different scenarios. But there are a few things that we've got to make sure are clear. First of all, let's define what this is. I think everybody knows what adultery is, and that is when one spouse strays outside of the marriage and has a sexual encounter with somebody else. That adultery, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about online chatting or text messaging with old high school girlfriend or anything like that. This is actually a physically in-person encounter that somebody is having. So that's what we're going to call adultery for purposes of this video. The next thing to know is that we have to show by a preponderance of the evidence that somebody committed adultery. And so what does that mean? That means not the same thing as beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the standard that you hear on cop shows and courtroom dramas. That's a criminal law standard. What we're showing is a preponderance of the evidence, and that is a civil court standard. So most of the evidence does it show that this is what is probably taking place. And with that in mind, it's important to understand that it's very hard to get eyewitness testimony of a lot of adulterous activity. You may suspect something. You have a spouse that has lost interest in intimacy and you wonder why, or that you've found some text messages with somebody else on your spouse's cell phone, or any various number of reasons why you suspect that there's some sort of adulterous relationship going on. It's hard to get direct witness testimony. Now, we have seen direct evidence, and usually that's on somebody's phone, videos, pictures, something like that. But that doesn't often come up in these cases. It does more frequently, actually, but usually there's a suspicion, and so you have to go about collecting the evidence to prove it. The evidence has to be specific to a time and place. You can't have evidence that you can't identify exactly when this incident took place, where it took place. The big overarching thing to keep in mind here with adultery is you have to prove opportunity and inclination. That's one way to get to proving adultery in the state of South Carolina. That is also a similar standard as exists in lots of other states as well. But in South Carolina, you have to prove that opportunity. Meeting up with somebody privately for brief periods of time probably isn't enough. But if the opportunity exists, let's say two people's cars outside of a hotel, now that's starting to look more like an opportunity if it was for a long enough period of time that something could have occurred. Now, you can't just have that. You have to have the inclination. And this is where text messages and a past history and things like that might come in as well. So you have to marry these two things together, mostly because the court recognizes that you're not often going to have the smoking gun, right, in these circumstances, because people are inherently private about what they're doing. It's a secretive relationship, that sort of thing. So you have to try to marry these things together. Oh, excuse the pun. Bring these two things together, that you have an opportunity and inclination to commit adultery. A lot of times we have to engage a private investigator to follow somebody around, GPS trackers, checking out cell phones, trying to get different data points so that we can prove this. Private investigator isn't always expensive and isn't always necessary, but it is something that we use a good bit to try to prove our case if we were going to try to make an adultery case. The reason for this is because adultery is a fault ground for divorce. If you can prove that your spouse is committing adultery, if you can prove that that person is the reason for the breakup of the marriage, then you are going to be in a much stronger position when negotiating a divorce settlement. Also, adultery creates a bar to collecting alimony. So let's say that a husband is out there committing adultery, he cannot ask for any sort of alimony, or the same vice versa. Wife is entering into an affair with another person, then she's not going to be able to claim alimony at the time of that divorce. Sometimes the cheating spouse will actually admit it. He or she has wanted out of the marriage for many years, finally strayed and entered into a relationship with somebody else and says, I've had it. We just need to be done with this. They admit it. They know that they're going to take it on the chin financially during the divorce, and they're going to assume a lot of burdens, probably a lot of debt along with it, but they're fine with all of that. They decide to do that. In that context, we can get an affidavit from the paramour. We can get an affidavit from other witnesses that might know about this relationship. We can try to do that as amicably as possible to try to make sure that we have the at-fault divorce locked in place. And also there's no funny business going on. We don't have to go around getting a PI, a private investigator, or getting any other testimony from friends and family of suspicious activity. There's no following around and GPS trackers and all that sort of stuff. You can cut straight to it if the cheating party spouse is willing to admit it, and then have the paramour sign an affidavit or other witnesses participate as well. Now, there's one last issue that we've got to address, and that is, how does adultery affect custody in children? I mentioned before a lot on this channel, every single circumstance is different. So it really depends on what's going on with your particular case. But I'll say this, is that courts want what's in the best interest of the children. Okay, so whatever is going on that is going to be best for the kids is going to be what a court, a judge is going to rule. And if you are engaged in a relationship with somebody else who is not the children's mother, for instance, courts don't want the children going and living with a total stranger. And so for this reason, you're probably going to find that the non-cheating party has a little bit of deference here, has a little bit of an advantage when it comes to determining who is going to have custody, particularly if this is a relationship that you want to continue and to pursue. You got to be prepared for that to have consequences on any sort of custody dispute. Now, in terms of visitation, there also may be rules around that. A lot of times, when you come up with settlement agreements for divorces, that there will be rules around whether or not somebody else who is a non-spouse can stay in the house or be around the kids and things like that. A lot of those things get negotiated because a lot of times judges are going to create hard and firm, fast rules that everybody can follow if the judges have to make a decision about this. But these are just some of the issues that are involved in adultery, how to prove an adultery case in the state of South Carolina. Let me remind you that this is all South Carolina specific content. We provide these videos, however, so people outside of the state of South Carolina can have a proper context, because our laws here often mirror laws in other states. But if you're outside of the state of South Carolina, I encourage you to locate a lawyer locally in your jurisdiction to try to find out more information about adultery and how it impacts divorce. And if you're in fact in the state of South Carolina, we are happy to talk to you about your options and try to provide you further information if you want to retain us. My name is John Henderson, and this is HH Law. Thanks for watching.